So who am I? First and foremost, I'm a husband and father. This picture's a little dated. The girl with the sunglasses on her head is now a junior at Kenyon College in economics and philosophy. The little girl with pigtails is headed to the University of Arkansas to study to be an elementary teacher. And if my wife somehow sees this video, she looks exactly the same as that picture. I've also, spent some time, you heard the bio a little bit, I spent 13 years at IBM, the last 5 of which was very focused on data analytics, machine learning, AI, and what we affectionately called Watson. From there, I've been doing some other things. I currently serve as Digital Strategist at Valorem. And the conversation we're going to have today is really around what Valorem did when I was CTO at Club Ready, working very closely with the Microsoft team here in St. Louis. And so who is Valorem? We're a digital transformation firm. We're based in Kansas City. We have offices in St. Louis, Kochi, India, and Seattle, and work very closely with a lot of you in the room. And as I mentioned, here's some of our work, and I'm not going to spend too much more time on any sort of marketing. You just see Club Ready, and about the 4th row down on the far left. That's what we're going to focus on today. I see it as a huge success story here in St. Louis, maybe not well publicized, but a success story nonetheless, leveraging AI and machine learning to really drive a successful exit and acquisition. So who was Club Ready? Club Ready is a fitness software provider, and they really worked across and continue to work across the whole gamut of fitness organizations. You have the very large big box gyms, and then all the way down to yoga, boutique firms, cycle bars, those kinds of firms, yoga, individual salons, all the way up to massive franchises, in organizations that have become almost cities, the UFC gyms that have tremendous capacity. And so that was the market that Club Ready served. They had been bootstrapped from 2009 to about 2016. 2 founders built the company over time, were very successful. Around 2016, the end of 2016, they took on a round of funding, a Series A. Unfortunately, it was taken out of New York. It would have been great if it was a round raised here in St. Louis by Level Equity. And with that came the pressure to really kind of take the business to the next level. Part of that was for them hiring a CTO that could help them kind of make that transition and really take things and formalize how things work. And I think that's an important context because, again, you saw in my title, it didn't say data scientist, it said digital strategist. And I say that so it can calibrate how I'm going to talk about what happened at Club Ready. So I became CTO in 2017. And the competitive landscape in fitness is still pretty much looks like this. There's some big players. You see MindBody, ABC Financial. They're in the fitness and wellness management. I guess one of the ways you could think about Club Ready is we called ourselves the Dr. Pepper of the fitness industry. In other words, MindBody, publicly traded. They were the Coca-Cola, ABC Financial out of Little Rock. We saw them as Pepsi, and then ourselves. And so there is some consolidation going in the market, hence I'm standing here talking to you as a Valorem employee versus a Club Ready employee. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, what drove that acquisition and some of the challenges we faced. So that's kind of the market. And one of the things I want you to see here too and think about is when I walked into this role, it was very clear that our biggest competitors had bigger development staffs, had full product teams, had much bigger sales teams. And if we spent our time focused on a feature fight with these bigger development teams, we would win some, we would lose some, but we would walk out all nicked up, right? Even in the win. So we had to figure out how to kind of leapfrog what was happening in the industry. So here's a little bit of the landscape. Again, think of Club Ready as this kind of long tail startup. It was equity backed and then became equity backed after a long bootstrap period. Our largest competitors had greater capital resources, And believe me, when we went on sales calls, when I went on sales calls, I was reminded of that by these other sales teams. And so it was something that was very clear and very obvious in our industry and how we were perceived. It's a fragmented market, and so there's a lot of players. A lot of these players use different pieces of software, but there is a very strong follow the leader mentality in the fitness industry. In other words, if a large Anytime Fitness goes with a certain software provider, other smaller players tend to follow. So it's critical at the end of the day that you capture these biggest players. Member retention, and we didn't just come to this, member retention is a huge industry pain point. People walk into gyms around January 1st, and they tend to stop going around April 30th, give or take, and we can get a little more precise in some of the data science stuff we did. And that's followed closely by and related to, by the way, by franchise health. And so one of the biggest challenges for like an Anytime Fitness out of Minneapolis is, do I have franchisees in trouble that I don't even know about and could potentially go out of business 6 months, 9 months down the road? And if so, I leave a gap in the market. And so being able to understand not just member health and health in the notion of are they at risk, but also franchise health is critical. Finally, the reason I talk about this is really take this case study out of the fitness industry. This is something I hear as a digital strategist over and over again. I have too much tech debt. We have all these challenges. There's no way we can possibly even think about data science until we fix and then fill in the blank, right? And that fill in the blank typically starts at about a year's worth of work and a $4 million estimator, right? The reality is you have to address those issues, but it doesn't stop you in the tracks. And we'll talk about how we did that at Club Ready. I mean, we were to the point where we did have some outages during peak periods. Imagine, again, January, February, very peak times of the year. Friday, Saturday tend to be peak times of the week. There's peak times of the day. You put some of those things together, and we had challenges. And we were a combination of on-prem and older cloud environment. We had on-prem, as well as we were in a data center or a provider called Terramark, which was owned by Verizon. And again, not to belabor this point, but I'm going to belabor it, is we had a very small development team. We weren't able to compete with our biggest competitors from a resource perspective. And the final piece of the political puzzle here is, if you talk to the equity firm, if you talk to my CEO, president of the company, the two co-founders, I clearly was not hired to do AI, right? I was hired to solve these problems, but you're going to see how we kind of had a conversation that included doing AI to help solve these business challenges we had and take advantage of the market that we had. So I'm going to pause there. Any questions, comments? Great. So in response, we built 3 organizational goals, and you'll see that really, build and operate a world-class product and software development organization has nothing to do with data science, AI, or ML. But we did have a vision that whoever has the best people wins. And so building an organization and even looking forward to the fact, even though I wasn't hired to do AI, looking forward to how do you start to bring in skill that can position you for an AI ML set of initiatives. We clearly had to stabilize and modernize the Club Ready platform. And then really the goal at the end of the day was to transform that platform and make it an industry leader. So I'm just going to give you a couple of the initiatives. Something that happened over time is we had this notion of, you see on goal 2, red line and blue line, that literally came out of a conversation we had in my office where I had a red marker and a blue marker. We drew out some efforts on the board, said what we were going to do over a period of time. And you can see early on, even though we were doing some of the mechanical things that you would expect to do as a CTO, get a leadership team in place, hire a product manager, get a product team in place. We were starting to look at what are the skill gaps that we have. Who do we have on staff that could potentially move into data engineering, move into data science, and who we would potentially need to hire and start to build kind of a warmish pipeline, so get to recruiters early on. And so that's the other thing I would encourage. Think in the future, even if you're not in a position today to do a full data science project, think forward and think about those gaps and start to engage the community, because these skills are very hard to hire, as we all know. A core part of stabilizing and modernizing our platform was moving to Azure. And so we did an evaluation process. We evaluated all the vendors you would expect us to evaluate. We ended up with Azure, and it's a separate talk on how we got there. I'd be happy to answer questions on the side or even in this session potentially. But we went with Azure, and it was interesting to me. For our CFO, what the Azure migration meant was this was going to be cheaper than Terramark, Verizon Terramark, and then to a large extent it was. It also allowed us, and I'll show you some stats, it allowed us to really stabilize our platform. In my days at IBM, you see I have gray hair, we used to call it throwing hardware at software problems. In some ways, we were throwing cloud or compute at software problems to buy us time to do the things we wanted to do from a transformation perspective. And again, as we were having conversations with clients, going out on those sales calls, think back to what I just said. Obviously we couldn't get into a feature fight with our competitors, but the conversations we were subtly having is if you could know or predict a certain question with some degree of certainty, what would that question look like? And over time, two kinds of questions emerged. One is if I could know that somebody's going to leave my club, my facility, in a particular period of time, and I knew what I could do to remediate them potentially being at risk, that would be awesome. And then again, at the franchisor level, talking to those folks, they would tell you, not only is it the member challenge, if I could tell when a franchisee's in trouble, insert our teams that are very good at doing business consulting in the fitness industry and insert them at the right times, make better investments than inserting them in perfectly healthy clubs and franchisees, which we tend to do because they're popular, we like them, we give them the resources versus going to the ones that are actually in trouble. And so identifying those opportunities, and this is a conversation regardless of your level in your organization you should be having. What are the kinds of questions, what are the kinds of problems that if we could get the answer to would move the business needle? Bless you. And so on prioritization and execution, this was an approach, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The bottom line, again, remember that I was brought in to solve problems. So getting alignment on what success meant was critical. Figuring out what are the business outcomes we're looking for, defining those business outcomes early. I've seen, and I'm sure we've all seen those projects in AI, ML, where they've become very successful, but there's a debate as to the value of that particular endeavor. Was it this thing we did in AI, ML that moved the needle on customer satisfaction, on revenue, on whatever the case may be, or was it the other 5 initiatives we undertook at the same time? So being very clear up front about how you define success, have that conversation about that success, and be data-driven about that success, and have KPIs that you can measure, and also be realistic. Don't try to claim everything. Don't try to claim all the success. From a credibility perspective, we had this conversation with the board all the time. Why is it we're getting better retention now with our particular clients? I would like to argue that it was our AI ML efforts, but we had a number of other initiatives underway in our customer success program as well. We were touching our clients more often. We were injecting content, training content at the right time. So there's a series of initiatives that were going on. But having some approach in defining how you all see success, from the chairman of the board to the CEO, all the way down into the organization, is fundamental, so that everybody kind of has an understanding of what you're really driving toward. And so the cool thing was the Azure migration worked. I mean, these are literally snapshots of the pre and post Azure migration. This is literally just about a year ago to the day. And we saw significant, this is just database snapshots. where we were seeing a lot of our bottlenecks. So this is something, and again, the point of this is this bought us time, right? And so the key was to stabilize the platform. Moving it into a platform that we could do that was key. But the other part of the story now is our data is sitting now, again, with advanced capabilities. Now we have the opportunity to really take advantage of the things we're talking about. And again, I guess the change for me, coming from IBM, when we came up with an algorithm or an approach, we would tend to patent the hell out of it, right? And not even show it to other IBM employees. The fundamental shift that's happened in the industry is the democratization of algorithms, capabilities. Now it's a matter of going out and finding the kind of pieces of the puzzle that work. You know, one of the sales objections I would hear, or objections in general, is how are you going to do X better than Google, or how are you going to do Y better than Microsoft? It's like, we don't have to. We're going to leverage that capability, add our capabilities to it, and create a new set of capabilities for our clients. So it's taking what's on the shelf now and applying it in imaginative ways. And put it another simple way, you know, if you looked at the Club Ready story, when they started out, the server sat in the founder's closet of his bedroom, and he had to upgrade those over time to the day where all we had to do to spin up a server was flip a switch, which is good and bad. You also have your Azure bill that's easy to spin up as well. So that's kind of the background. And the other interesting thing too is when I was at IBM, we were always scrounging for compute power. And so the compute power's there, it's available, the algorithms are there. Remember, we were having the conversation with our clients around what are your biggest problems? And again, member churn was a clear problem, right? In fact, when we were talking to Anytime Fitness, they said if you could just move that by a percentage point or two over time, you know, in that first 6 months, it goes immediately to our bottom line. And that was a common denominator with all of our clients. And it became very clear that the members that leave are disengaged, right? They're not being engaged in a timely way. So not only do you have to answer the questions and provide, you know, insight through the machine learning, you have to be able to deliver those insights to a staff of professionals that are running these organizations that are not technical, right? And so being able to give that front desk person sitting at a YMCA or wherever they are, the ability to interact with you in a way that's going to take you from a risk category and start to mitigate that risk was a critical part of this solution as well. So it's not just, and I saw a session this morning, hopefully you saw kind of that intersection of design and machine learning and AI is fundamentally important. So bringing insight in a way that's consumable and actionable by the teams that need to action on it is key. So the other interesting thing here, and I see this all the time, for better or for worse, the data that we had at Club Ready wasn't designed for machine learning. In fact, the original founder that wrote it had no real computer science background. But having said that, we kept track of every single member that had ever been a part of a facility managed by Club Ready. Every single member. We knew the second they became a, quote, non-member. So by accident, or by brilliant design, we had a tagged and labeled data set that was fairly useful. Now, having said that, there were some challenges, and we had the opportunity to do some interesting data engineering that I'll talk about. But the reality is, we had a decent data set that would allow us to do this kind of prediction. And finally, you know, like I said, it's okay to be able to answer these questions. It's okay to say, you know, current course and speed, Andy's going to leave the Chesterfield Athletic Club in 6 months. It's what do you do about it and how do you handle that? And we'll get into that. So the other interesting thing is, just the way the industry works, these fitness software providers really manage all the payments for a club. So all the data and all the money goes into Club Ready, and then it gets parsed out to the franchisees, and what's left over, and I'm oversimplifying this a ton, but goes back to the franchisor. But in that process, you have access to a ton of the payment information. So it wasn't hard for us to imagine a world where we could take that payment information, couple that with members at risk, and then be able to predict ahead of time when a franchise was potentially in trouble. And so this became kind of the backbone of our kind of initial prongs into leaping ahead of our competitors. And so again, this was kind of insight and newness for me. I just come out of IBM where we had developed all our own algorithms. We did everything very much, built it ourselves. We went on a journey where, again, at the time I'm CTO, Valorem is providing the data science. Their data scientists leveraged the Azure Machine Learning Studio, had pre-built algorithms, were able to jumpstart. And the key here was I didn't have to go to the board and say this was going to take a huge chunk of time. I was able to demonstrate results very quickly, show our customers very quickly, get them excited, get them forgetting about the fact that we had outages the previous January, and now we're able to predict and look ahead and provide value for them in their organization. And so it's kind of interesting. I mean, like any data science ML, you start to learn little things that you didn't really realize were going to be important. Over time, we figured out that if you got at least one t-shirt and one water bottle, you were more likely to stay. We found out if you had guest privileges that you could leverage, you were more likely to stay. And so it was the little things, the little insights that you were able to glean. And the way we put this into the system, and I'll show you a little bit, but there was a check-in monitor that was initially built to flag you if you hadn't paid your bill. So when you checked in with your little barcode, it would pop up and say, hey, Andy owes $38, try to collect it right here, kind of thing. Well, over time, we started to add more value to that check-in. We started to say they're a member at risk. And where we were headed is start to potentially predict lifetime value. We could look backwards on value and say, okay, this person over time has spent $400 at the club, but looking forward, they're potentially $1,000 a year kind of client. So you start to put pieces of this together and you start to drive real insight. But again, the key was putting it into the check-in monitor that those front desk people were used to using. We didn't change their world. We just gave them more data in that world and then gave them a suggestion. Offer them a free t-shirt, offer them that water bottle kind of approach. And the other thing we found is that really after 4 months, that's the sweet spot of when people start to leave, right? And so addressing that and understanding that when people started to hit that 4-month timeline, you could start to proactively engage them. And part of the Club Ready software was a great rules engine that we built. And so if we detected that somebody was at that 4-month time frame and they hadn't hit some of the criteria, they hadn't used their guest privileges, they haven't leveraged reciprocity, they hadn't gotten the water bottle or t-shirt, they were engaged in that way. And again, it's the simple things, it sounds simple, but it started to change the needle on revenue and cost. And the other thing we did is started to bake this into the apps, right? And so if I'm a gym owner, I'm a franchisee owner, or I manage a gym, when a member at risk checked in, I was notified immediately. And so I could go and interact with that person, talk to them, understand what the remediation might be, and then engage with them. I also got a list of members most at risk, and so I could go out and engage them through text, give them a phone call, try to engage them through email, but also have a campaign of engaging with them and offering them, again, a remediation, even though they're not coming into the club. Because again, if somebody's at risk, one of the obvious factors we detected is, you used to go to yoga class 4 times a week, then it was 3 times a week, then it was 1.5 times a week, and now you're not going, right? And so they're not coming into the club. You need a way to engage them in that way. And again, if I were sitting in your shoes, I maybe would take myself out of the fitness industry and say, could I think about my customers in the same way, detect those that are at risk, understand why they're at risk, and engage them in a more insightful way. So that kind of covered the gamut. I personally was excited. We were on a roll. Then all of a sudden, our second biggest competitor, the Pepsi of the world, got bought a lot of money started coming into our sector. Club Essential acquired Club Ready, and they're on their own mission now. It was a great acquisition, but I can tell you a big part of that whole process was talking about not the feature fights, not that kind of go through the software and the tech due diligence process of anybody who's ever been through it can be torturous. And so having these kinds of stories to talk about that adds value above and beyond the typical tech diligence can be very valuable. It was very valuable for us. And so that's the Club Ready story. They're still growing strong today. You're probably going to a club, if you're going to an Anytime or a Gold's Gym run by Club Ready, you may not have known it. But great company, success story. I mean, we were literally in Wildwood, behind a Deerberg's. Our office was very nondescript in a bike shop. And there we felt like potentially on the cusp of changing the world in the fitness industry. That's my presentation. Love to take any questions you may have. Yep. We got a protocol, sorry.
Thank you. So just out of curiosity, you had mentioned sort of the key indicators of churn. What are some of those key indicators that you use to measure the probability of a customer leaving?
Yeah, let's go back. So it was interesting. There's like a few things. One is if a club opened up next to you, a new club opened up next to you within a certain percent of your existing club. So let's say I went to a Gold's Gym and it was 4 miles away. But then a Club Pilates opened up 2.5 miles away. That was an indicator of churn. If I missed a payment, I would tend to churn. Whether it was embarrassment or whatever the case may be, if somehow my card failed or something happened where I didn't make a payment, I would tend to churn. And so when that happened, the clubs that we were working with would give a forgiveness and say, don't worry about it, we know you missed a payment, that's fine, things happen, and try to give continuity to the fact that payment was missed. A couple of other indicators, people just get fatigued, right? So they're very gung-ho about a specific thing. You can literally watch them do yoga 4 times a week. And so they do that for 4 straight months, and they're like, instead of going and doing something else, they tend to quit the club and go somewhere else. So if you can detect that fatigue, and it's very detectable, then you can start to recommend other things to do, and we saw that very clearly. And so those were a couple of indicators that you could see in the data. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Were there some more that were specifically how you determine each individual, let's say, client? Were there any more indicators that you used to specifically determine whether a specific customer was going to leave?
Yeah, and so
other than fatigue.
Yeah, no, you could see their frequency of visits. Again, that opening of a club, the failure of a payment. There are some other demographic things. Certain age groups tended to change clubs more often, especially when a new club opened. And so, the younger you were, the more you tended to club shop kind of thing, and fitness facility shop. And so that the key was keeping that fresh. And there's actually now kind of a movement in the industry where there's large investment firms buying like a Cycle Bar, a Pier Bar, buying a whole portfolio of fitness facilities and then directing you to, as you get that fatigue, say, go try our Cycle Bar right down the street. Very successful investment firm. Question?
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed how the practical nature of what you're talking about, where it's not like an abstract score, it's very focused on the specific mechanics of helping that front desk. When you mentioned the technical debt and how that was like a potential obstacle, how did you balance, I'm specifically imagining that there's a legacy system that's very tightly integrated with existing stuff, and then there's like new technology you wanted to bring to the table.
That's right.
That didn't kind of work together. How did you kind of like work around the technical debt and still have that integration across the 2 layers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we did sprints that were focused on tech debt. So we didn't ignore it. We didn't pretend like it didn't exist. We attacked it, and we had a list of things we attacked, and that was called our red line. And so there was a series of things we were doing. With the blue line things, we thought it was important that we not re-architect a whole new system. In other words, we baked what we were doing right into the check-in monitor that already existed, right? And so we didn't want to, create like, this appendage out here that, we were a monolith, right? So it was monolithic code, monolithic database. And so, we could have done a couple of different things. We could have tried to rewrite it. That wasn't going to work. So we just worked within the constraints of that monolith and made it work within the functionality, not just from a technology perspective, but to not change things up for that end user, that worst person working at the front desk. They're used to using that check-in monitor as kind of their Bible of what's happening with that particular user, because it also would tell you all the things you bought, right? So when you checked in, it would say whether I paid my bill or not. It would say I bought water, so they could suggest the water or not. So they were used to using that as a mechanism, and so we just added to it.
So you would integrate the Azure stuff that you did back down into that?
Yes, absolutely. It's a good question, and I think that was kind of the heart and soul of why it probably worked.
Coincidentally, I happen to own a gym, and everything you're talking about is right there in the data.
Yes.
And it really is a matter of just being able to look at it wholly and bring it down to an individual client and find that out. You mentioned the 4-month mark.
Yeah.
You can see it in the data. You can watch people check in, check out. You can watch people not use it for a year and stay on for 4 years without using it. There's a whole bunch of strange.
No, so you just brought. So what software do you use, by the way? I just have to ask.
Easy Facility.
Okay. So that was the other thing. There are facilities. I mean, especially like a Planet Fitness. They almost don't want you to show up and keep paying your bill, right? And so there was debate about that. Do we really want to alert somebody that they haven't been going, but they're still paying their bill, right? And so it's hard to get into all the nuance in a conversation like this, but yeah, there were conversations like that. Do you alert somebody that they're paying, $39 a month and they're really not taking advantage of it? Most of our clients said yes. I mean, it was just the size of our client that we would. Question?
What was your process for getting your team up to speed with the Azure ML tool? Since when you're coming to something like this new, many people, when you say, well, let's give this a shot, it's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Well, we did a couple of things. One is we engaged Valorem, which was now my company. So we engaged them as the data scientists, and they worked with our team. So it's kind of a side-by-side thing where they did the work, but our team was there, and we hired some people that had data science backgrounds that were very new to data science right out of school, and they worked. The other thing, to be frank, is Microsoft invested an enormous amount of resources and actual capital into what we were doing. It was not doable had they not, frankly. And it wasn't just a capital thing because, our private equity fund, we were well-funded, but it was also a political thing. It's much easier, at least for us, for me, with my limited skills, it's easier for me to go to a board of directors in New York and say, you know what, Microsoft's investing $125,000 into this. We have to invest X amount. We're in this thing together. They're clearly putting skin in the game. That makes that a much easier sell. And so that was a huge success factor as well, is the Microsoft partnership that really wasn't being treated as a client, but being treated as a partner. And it wasn't just one time and gone. Microsoft was at our office every week. We had experts engaged all the time, engaged with our team. And so I think, coming from IBM, this is just my little soapbox and I'll get off it, I promise, is it always amazed me that people didn't take advantage of the IBM resources that were available if you just knew where to go. And they were free, right? You could get an expert on site from IBM that just do these things for you. Engage whoever you are, whoever your partner is, engage them. If it's Microsoft, engage them. Because they are in a knife fight with Amazon and Google, right? They're compelled and motivated to help you. So we took advantage of that. It's a very good question. Did I answer it?
You did.
Thank you.
So I'm curious about how you went from the insights, the model building, and the data product building to actually having it implemented across a franchisee footprint. So a lot of not everything, but a lot of the things that you talked about that needed to be done need to be done by frontline employees in the gyms. And I presume under your model, those folks don't work for Club Ready, they work for the actual franchisees
Correct.
doing the clubs. So now you've got a couple of layers where you got to get a whole bunch of different people lined up, understanding, why are you now telling me to do this? Why is it so important? Why should I change my norms and behaviors? And, oh, you don't pay me, right? And so if you could talk a little bit about how you went from sort of the lab, so to speak, to then getting this implemented within that very, very complex set of relationships in the franchisee model.
So that's not, great question, by the way. And that wasn't a ML AI problem. Any sort of change we introduced into the software, we had to kind of go through that change management process. And so we did. We would go through an awareness kind of campaign. Here's what's coming in the software. By the way, we did this all the time, and it still fell through the gap. So what I'm about to tell you is not some silver bullet that, oh, the world was all great, right? We would make an awareness campaign. We would put out a beta that people could leverage. We would do training. So you could, every Thursday we had a training on new features coming down the pike. We would have a video, all the change management things you would do. But that was a fundamental challenge regardless. It was amazing, just a side story, just because your point's a good one. I would go visit clubs just to see how they're using our software. The things they were doing with it was fairly unnatural. It was never designed to do how they were doing things, right? Because they just learned to work around things. And so that whole knowledge management, change management was a fundamental that we were always dealing with, and that's why we tried to keep it within that context. And then certain franchisors that were bigger, they had their own training departments, and then they would do their own training with their staffs as well, right? The real challenge wasn't the Anytime Fitnesses, it was the smaller nine owned by a small group of people, and they could fly under the radar, and all of a sudden their software is different. Like, what the heck happened on a Sunday night, right? Because it was SaaS-based, so you got it, and everybody got it. Good question.
All right, that's all the time we have, unfortunately. Everybody, please give a hand of applause for our speaker. Thank you for attending.